In El Salvador, one of the most brutal and violent days in 10 years of war. While rebels and government troops continued fighting for control of the capital city of San Salvador, a group of armed men entered a university there and brutally murdered 8 people, including 6 Jesuit priests.
And I picked it up and she said they killed them all. And I was like, what are you talking about? She said, the Jesuits, they're all dead. I don't understand what you're talking about. And she repeated it, and then I realized what had happened, and I turned on the news and saw the headline that 6 Jesuit priests had been murdered at the University of Central America in San Salvador. And among them were 3 people that I knew. And I just couldn't believe it. Like, who would do this? And then Congress was still in session, and then Speaker Tom Foley, got a group of Congress people together, and everybody was saying, "What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this?" We were told that everything was fine in El Salvador. We were told that there were no more human rights problems. We were told that the FMLN had been defeated. 6 priests killed on the front page of the newspaper. What happened here? How could this possibly have occurred? So for me, going down there so often, from the early '80s until even a couple of years after the Jesuits were killed, I was really inspired by their example, and because they were such an inspiration, I think for me, it made it all the more unbelievable and horrific that they could have their lives taken in the way they were taken. I mean, the 3 that I knew, Ellacuria, Segundo, Monte, and Martin Barreau, were all 3 different personalities, but all very fascinating individuals. I think Father Martin Barreau was the first one of the Jesuits that I think I may have met, and I'll never forget when I left a meeting with him. I was a young congressional aide. I didn't know what to ask, so I was like, anything you want me to bring back to Washington? And he kind of looked and smiled and said, just tell them to remember one thing. Remember that we're human beings too. And that always stuck with me. And Father Segundo Montes was kind of the expert on immigration and migration and the plight of Salvadoran refugees. And so while we were pushing a bill to stop their deportation, we oftentimes would invite him up here to give testimony, and he was constantly producing papers and opinion pieces and strategies in order to help deal with the Salvadorans who had fled the violence. And Father Ellacuria was a little, was a little bit more intimidating of a figure, at least from my perspective. He seemed to, he was the head of this incredible university, but he had this, he was so much respected by everybody whoever dealt with him. I mean, he had a brilliant mind, and I remember one time I was supposed to meet him at a coffee shop, and he called, his assistant called to ask if we could meet at the university because he had received a death threat. So I met with him at the university.
What would you guys meet about?
We met basically to kind of, I wanted to get his assessment for how things were going. Where was their hope? What could the United States do better? What should we be doing in Congress? What should I be telling my boss, Joe Moakley, what to do? And how do we deal with all that's happening here? And with all the Jesuits, but especially the Ellacuria, they were always trying to think of new and kind of imaginative ways to get to peace. It was always, if we just, it was always maybe a little different perspective and a different, even in terms of how we should speak about some of the stuff that was going on. The goal should be to end this violence. End this violence. What do we need to do to end this violence? Create a more just society. And so I as a young aide, I looked at these men as great leaders. I mean, and in El Salvador, they kind of had the status of like congressmen and senators do. I mean, people read what they wrote, and they wrote all the time. And things were published in publications that came out of the UCA and other publications, and so they were on the radio, they were on TV. I mean, people listened to them. They took notice of what they had to say, and so I always felt it a great privilege when I was in El Salvador to be able to have the chance to just meet with them when they came up here. We would host briefings and things for others, aides and other members of Congress. So, I admired them. I admired them very much. It's about action. That's why they were killed. Romero was killed because he stood with the poor, he stood with the oppressed. Same with the churchwomen, same with the Jesuit priests. I mean, they were killed because they were constantly speaking on behalf of those who were being oppressed. You know, they were advocating to make sure that people who were hungry got fed. When someone was disappeared, they would be the first people at the local security agencies demanding an accounting for where that person was, and they believed in ending the violence, and as a result, they were killed. That's why the Jesuits were killed. That's why the churchmen were killed. That's why Romero was killed.